People say Barry Humphries is a comic genius, a giant of world satire. Personally, I'm sorry, Possums, he leaves me cold. I'm sorry, call me old-fashioned if you like. To comply with my contract, I have to introduce him. So without any further ado, clap if you feel like it. Barry I'm such a bad businesswoman that I let Barry Humphries walk all over me. He trusts me up in a contract that even my lawyers today have difficulty in breaking. But I have no bitterness.
He was always a figure in my world, long before I met him. And I think I was in spaces that he was in for years before I actually encountered him. And then it was as if we already knew each other.
And these little kiddies in the neighbourhood and from other neighbourhoods used to come along and they'd pop in and sit around the kitchen table. You remember that little Rupert who delivered the papers? He was very shy. He was.
I think you have to realise that Barry, as a creative person, is a very complicated personality. He's capable of great warmth, great friendship, and yet he's equally, on the stage, capable of really cutting, tough wit. And that's what makes him so interesting.
I am basically a housewife. I can call you Jane, can't I? I love these little furry shoulders of yours, too. What was that, Jane? Oh, darling, you know, the acrylic is a protected animal.
Just look at her hair, her nails, her clothes. Dame Edna is the epitome of the superstar, of the glamour life, everything. And Sir Les is just the pig, the dirty man with the yellowed fingers and filthy, and you know the underwear is just the lowest. And it's so funny to see he's taken such extremes.
Congratulations, BBC, for introducing Jane and me. She's feminine, I'm butch and macho. We'll stick it up, the British chaps. But if things don't work out just like that, forgive an old romantic diplomat. If we come unstuck, Joni, please, accept this gift of Aussie cheese. A fine, mature Tasmanian breed. And when you sniff it, think of me.
Barry's sense of the lewd is as surreal as it can get, and so it's always surprising, but in a sense, you're never surprised it's surprising, because he will always push things too far.
Look at these savouries, Jane. Just eat your fill. These, dear. These. This is an Indigenous Australian savoury. Can you guess what it's called? Please, don't be unnecessary.
It's a very Australian thing. You see the joke looking you right in the eye, and a lesser man would quail, would think, no, I can't do that joke. But Barry will do that joke. And he'll push it and push it and push it, and he's utterly free of embarrassment.
What I didn't know was that this place was a chiropodist, because my request had suffered in translation. You see, and so I've been directed to the wrong place by this little slant-eyed yellow bastard behind the desk. Please. And I'm shown into a little cubicle. Very small, I think. I'm not going to get much more than a knee trembler in here. And I'm in there for a while, very towy, very agitated. And all of a sudden, a lovely little tie sealer comes in. Oh, beautiful. She must have had one on her like a mouse's ear. She's wearing a white uniform and she's got a little tin dish in her hand and a towel over her arm. So I whips out the old purple-headed warrior. Yeah, I flashed my frightener. She screams and dropped her accoutrement. She said, that's not a foot. I said, no, but it's near enough.
The double entendre he's got to a fascinating degree. I was just happy to turn up and be treated badly or friendly or patronised. Being patronised by Edna is one of the great experiences in life.
Have I ever told you I'm from Australia, Jane?
I had suspected it.
Had you, sweetheart? Well, I am. Of course, my accent has disappeared because of all the people I rub up against.
Right, they get the word in edgeways.
We'll let that pass, I think, Jane.
I've met a few Dame Ednas, all There are a lot of aspects of in Dame Edna that I've seen in other people over the years. It's a brilliant satire.
I had, in a sense, been discovered first by Rupert Murdoch. Some friends of mine in Melbourne had sent my photograph to the Morning Murdoch, and they were appealing for the loveliest mother in Australia. Well, to cut a long story short, I won from the whole of Australia. Edna really only happened in 1955, the year before the Melbourne Olympic Games.
Good evening. I would like to introduce to you a very close friend of mine, Mrs. Norm Everidge, a housewife from 36 Humoresque Street, Moonee Ponds. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Norm Everidge. Excuse I?
Big advertisements appeared in the Morning Murdoch and other local papers, begging housewives to consider, Latvian shot putters and Ceylonese fast bowlers. And we were making a review at the time. Ray Lawler, who was the director of the company, said to me, look, write something about the Olympic Games. And so I said, well, I'll write perhaps a sketch for Zoe Caldwell to play about a Melbourne housewife offering her beautiful home.
I've only addressed branch meetings of the Housewives Association before. Mind you, television's marvellous, isn't it? It's such a lovely piece of furniture.
I was called by a person called Barry Humphries. You see, I'd made some television appearances in the very early days of Australian television, and he was doing a comedy show, and he wanted to impersonate and take the mickey out of Melbourne housewives, which was typical of him. And when I'd finished it, Lawler said, why don't you play the part? I said, no, it's written for Zoe Caldwell. He said, well, I think when you've been reading it to me, it's funnier if you do it, because when we were touring in Shakespeare, you used to do this funny woman in the back of the bus. I did a voice.
There's no doubt about it. Nothing like a flesh-pink Gladys.
To cut a long story short, I ended up by appearing on the stage instead of Barry. The director insisted on it, and his nose has been out of joint over that for years. My mother was amused by the character of Edna because she'd been told by her hairdresser that this Edna invention of mine was very like my aunt. And since my mother found my aunt on my father's side a mildly risible, if not even contemptible figure, my mother was tickled pink that I had constructed a character which everyone seemed to think was based on my aunt. But what nobody told my mother was that they thought, although this character of Edna resembled my aunt, she was identical to my mother. She was very sad that he'd pursued a life in the theatre. And I think secretly she might have hoped that he'd break out on his own and do something himself. But no, he was always, I think, fundamentally, well, I don't think he had what it took.
But there's one thing we've got they haven't got anywhere else in the world, you know. Our wonderful Australian smile. Oh, you know, on my way back to Moonee Ponds from the airport, even the Venetian blinds seem to be smiling.
She certainly says things that middle-class Australian housewives are bound to say. And she still does. That kernel is still there. But Edna Everidge was just one of a very important galaxy of characters, of whom my favourite was Sandy Stone. And Sandy Stone was the world's dullest man.
He's, what Barry would call the Adagio act. He's the timeless, age-old pensioner who sort of was a World War I veteran, but over the years he's become a ghost, and he's like a forgotten, quiet, little sun-spotted, croaky-voiced guy that just sits and talks about his life. Quite beautiful.
I realised that there was a whole generation of Aussies who didn't speak in a strong, assertive voice. The popular conception, indeed, of the Australian accent, but who tended to speak in a very, very quiet, rather sibilant, almost a falsetto way of talking. There's a lovely crowd of chappies at the Louisa Hutchinson Memorial Bowling Green, and a man makes a lot of contacts that way. Not that I'll need contacts when I retire, I suppose. More friends, I suppose you'd say. Of course, Beryl and I, we used to be as keen as mustard in the old days of the tennis club before the war. Beryl was a little humdinger in the mixed doubles. She always ran up the best tennis cake, too.
We'd sit there in the clubhouse after a match with our thermos and some of the different other couples and their thermi.
Sandy has always been dying, and I sometimes wonder if Barry isn't foreseeing his own demise and how it will be as he is rolled backwards out of the operating theatre into oblivion, leaving behind him this wonderful perfume of language in the air.
Somehow it always seems like a long summer afternoon when you're playing mixed doubles. There's a tennis club right next to the repad outside my window, and I can hear them playing right up until when the light goes. And the couples laughing when there's nothing particularly funny. The sound of the sprinkler on the spare court. And the sound of the hose being dragged across the tennis court. The couples saying thank you to the kiddies when a ball lobs over the fence. And I can hear them shut the cyclone gate. And the cicadas. And the cars going off into the distance. Cars going off into
It's Barry's greatest character, in my view, because it penetrates a different area than his own personality. It gets out there to the ordinary man, whereas I think Edna and Les Patterson are aspects of himself.
I only hope and pray that when the time eventually does come, as it will, Beryl's the first to go. You see, it was different in the old days of the mixed doubles and the tennis club and the crazy whist and the couples. But you can't win the lucky spot all your life.
When songs of spring are sung.
I do remember crying over that one. He often moved me to tears because that was the life I was desperate to escape from. I mean, Barry, I think, was the best critic of the Australian way of life, and it was utterly bleak.
In my youth, Melbourne looked English. The calendar on the back of the kitchen door always showed a thatched cottage or a stately home of some kind. England was home, and my paternal grandfather spoke with a Lancastrian accent.
It was a very Anglican, old-fashioned Anglican city. Beautiful city and very nice people, very well-intentioned people, but it was absolutely made for intelligent young people to rebel against.
I had no intention of going to the university, but I found myself, as it were, wafted into this life.
And there was this person who would make my father livid with rage. This tall, long, narrow-gutted ape with lank, dirty, long hair and a pale, intense face. And then I would occasionally see him in the distance and think, yes, it was like Rimbaud, it was like Byron, he was the escape, he was the Mr. Wrong, he was the man of no morals, the man of dubious sexual orientation. He was everything that might free me from that straitjacket.
This interest that I had from a very early age in the activities of the Dadaists, these anarchistic painters, performers, humorists, really they were, taken far too seriously by the art historians of the teens of the 20th century in Central Europe. This group had a huge influence on me. I created my own chapter of the Dada movement in Melbourne, had art exhibitions and did shows. And I still have this desire to surprise the audience and discomfort them a little.
It's inspired by a marvellous, marvellous painting, The Scream by Munch.
I made exhibits for him. There was one exhibit called Puss in Boots, where I had to make a lot of custard and fill up these Wellingtons with custard.
He'd get sponge cakes and sort of smash them between two plates of glass and call them cakescapes. And you would actually get fantastic sort of, tonal patterns.
And I had dish tonight. Look at my saucy hemline, Possum. Couldn't you gobble me up, couldn't you?
He would go to immense trouble to get an effect. There was the famous progressive meal. He would be coming in from his suburb, Moonee Ponds, or whatever it was, to the university, and some hoyden or doxy would serve him a different course of breakfast through the train window at each stop, all the way. Because the press realised this was the greatest story they could possibly have, and he was immensely famous quite early.
I don't know if Barry ever did do that. I hope he did, because the whole point about these installations is that they were an art form years before their time.
A lot of his work is done in advance. He's a great preparation man. He would fill the airline sick bag full of potato salad and have it ready. And when all the attention was focused on him in the first-class compartment, he would open the sick bag and start eating the contents with a spoon. Stuff like that.
What makes you laugh?
Well, other people's misfortune, mostly. I was reminded at the time of an old sketch that I used to do at the university when I actually hired a blind piano tuner to tune the theatre piano, which I had centre stage, but I had the curtain down. And I'd arranged for the tuner to come at the time the show was about to start. So he was tuning the piano, and then I raised the curtain slowly, and the audience thought they were watching some kind of a piano recital, which was, of course, involved many repeated notes. If you've ever heard a piano being tuned, it's pretty boring. So the audience then started booing and stamping, until I came onto the stage and making gestures to the audience to, for God's sake, you know, escorted this person off, giving him his white stick as he left crookedly, he left the stage, and a dead silence fell on the audience, you see, a dead silence of shame fell on the audience. Of course, the blind piano tuner was a friend of mine. It was a performance, but it was an attempt to shame the audience. And then the Film Society was doing a sort of episodic kind of movie where each little group had to make its own episode. 1954, it's pretty crude, but it looks as though it might have been made by René Clair, you know, a Melbourne version of René Clair. He did things when he was a student, I think, to attract attention. I don't think there's anything unusual about that. And I've met people in him at school, and apparently he was quite clever at his exams. But he's a lost soul now. I think he's hoping, you see, that someone at the BBC or the National Theatre will think of him for Ibsen, or Strindberg, or some little role in Shakespeare, or even who's that Iranian man, Mr. Yentop. I think he's hoping that one day he'll come in from lunch at about 5:30 in the afternoon, and someone will say, "What about Barry Humphries for something?" And I think he's hoping that in a moment of amnesia, little Alan will say, "Oh, that's a good idea." It's sad, isn't it, that Barry is waiting, really, for the virtually impossible to happen.
Barrington Bradman Bing Mackenzie, I bequeath the sum of $2,000 on condition that you leave for the United Kingdom immediately to further the cultural and intellectual traditions of the Mackenzie dynasty.
Struth. We were all on our way to the real world. We knew it had to be there, but somewhere life was happening. You know, we could just get out of this bell jar that is Australia.
Aunt Edna and I have been having a bit of a chinwag, dear, and we thought
I'm going to London with you, Mary.
Come again?
I'm going to London with you.
Apart from the Australian 9th Division's brilliance at the Battle of El Alamein, he's the best thing that came out of Australia.
Spike Milligan had seen a show of mine in Australia, and he came backstage to see me. Of course, naturally, what young comedian of that period could not have but idolised old Spike?
As far as I'm concerned, you see, I thought he was already a comedy great. The rest of the world had to catch up, that's all.
He made me aware of the kind of nobility of the comedian. You know, he was sublimely funny and totally daring.
I think he owes me something. I think it's money.
From the very first moments that I heard Barry on his hind legs performing, I thought, this man's wonderful. He's very funny, and he's also a poet.
Oh, I dare say you notice quite a difference in me. A few more crow's feet, perhaps. But what are they but the dried-up beds of old smiles?
I thought, that's wonderful. I've got to work with this man. Barry was part of The Late Show with John Bird and John Fortune. And then I think partly due to Barry and I wrote Barry Humphries' Scandals. And there was one film which I loved making, and that was the man going off to work in the city in the morning, and his mother says to him, "Are you wearing clean underpants?" And he says, "Oh, dear."
You know what happened
to your poor father, right in the middle of a board meeting, too.
All right, Mummy, but I'm going to be late for work this morning.
Better late than sorry.
You are an old pessimist, Mummy. What on earth do you suppose could happen to me today?
Have you got them on?
Yes, Mummy.
You were quick.
No flies on me, Mummy. While I was working in the 60s in London, I was mostly in Lionel Bart musicals and Joan Littlewood plays. And I didn't do the Australian act for fear of failure. Only in Private Eye did I, at Peter Cook's request, write the balloons for Barry Mackenzie, a comic strip about an Australian in London, which Nick Garland drew. And that had a cult following. Then, with Bruce Beresford's help, we made the comic strip into a film. And that was, in a way, my breakthrough in the early 70s in Britain. The editor, Richard Ingram, kept saying, this is never going to catch on, this will never take off. Cookie says, you publish it or you're out of a job, you bastard.
The strip was quite sort of autobiographical, because it was basically an Aussie trying to find his way around London and the British scene, and being fairly scornful about it all.
What have you got in this case? Personal effects. Foster's Lager, a very little-known beer. I promoted it in the comic strip just because it was a Melbourne beer. There was only one shop you could get it. Now you can get it in every shop. The whole of England is being sick. Not a cent has found its way into Brian Humphries' pocket, which explains why he's such a deeply embittered human being.
Well, don't tell me you're going to make something out of that. I'm afraid I shall have to confiscate this lot, sir.
Barry, where have you been? You've been as slow as a wet week.
Oh, you wouldn't read about it, Auntie. I wouldn't have minded the bastard that I've been a bit civil. When it comes to fleecing you, the ponds have got the edge on a jippo.
The fact, of course, that I myself am an extremely puritanical character makes it very easy to write about Barry Mackenzie, who himself is, of course, a very puritanical fellow. It's just that he happens to be foul-mouthed as well.
It was a terrific help to Private Eye, because the fortunes of Private Eye were quite low at that stage. And this feature, I think, raised our circulation an awful lot.
Got a funny feeling, me Ned Kelly. I'm going to cry Ruth. Cry Ruth? Better do it over the rail, mon ami.
Back in Australia, it was regarded as absolute treason. And a lot of the enemies Barry made in Australia, he made through the Barry Mackenzie strip. When the news got there that he was promoting this raucous, naive, lecherous, unsuccessfully lecherous Australian character, it was not taken well.
Private Eye was then banned in Australia. Banned in Australia because Barry Mackenzie was considered rude and crude. And, of course, we don't have such people in Australia, do we?
Now, listen, mate, I need to splash the boots. You know, strain the potatoes. What are the horses? You know, go where the big knobs hang out. Shake hands with the wife's best friend. Train the dragon. Siphon the python. Bring the rattlesnake. You know, unbutton the mutton. Like Point Percy at the porcelain.
My father was a builder, and so I knew Pat, the bricklayer. I knew Alec, the carpenter. And I would mix with these workmen, and they'd make their tea and eat their sandwiches and tell incomprehensible stories to each other, which I assume may well have been of a questionable nature, as my mother would describe them, or indeed uncalled for. That was another favourite phrase of hers, so that on one occasion, when Alec went off to have a pee, and I asked him where he was going, he said, just off to strain the potatoes, he said. So that night at dinner, halfway through the meal, I said to my mother, excuse me, I just have to go off and strain the potatoes. And I heard my mother saying to my father, where did Barry hear that? And my father was meant to caution the men to be very careful not to use foul language in front of little Barry. Little did my mother, or indeed my father, know that I was later to become a great exponent of filthy language, both in print and on the stage.
I really needed that. I was as dry as a dead dingo's donger.
Barry Mackenzie was an uncontrolled id, and I think he was part of Barry's id. Les Patterson is a direct development of Barry Mackenzie, no question. Except Les Patterson is the sussed version.
This little Sheila done a streak in the back seat of the car. I didn't know where to look. And we got to our destination. The driver says, that'll be so-and-so, you know. And he says, how are you going to pay me? And she... Oh, I'm sorry, I can't say it, but he flashed the map of Tasmania, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for those of you who aren't too crash hot on the geography, Tasmania is a triangular continent. A bit on the bushy side. No, please, oh, for goodness sake. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the driver said, haven't you got anything smaller?
Barry developed quite early on a taste for the off-colour joke. And I would hear the audience laughing without knowing quite why. And I think that's a sure sign that something uncalled for or unsavoury has been said.
My parents reluctantly took me to the Tivoli because comedians who performed there were sometimes described by my father as blue. I never knew what that quite meant. It was a mysterious epithet when you come to think of it. Was it the colour of their skin, I wondered, or was it what they wore? You turn me on, if I may say so. Particularly when you mention forbidden subjects. There's no worry. You know, I understand for the first time what the term stand-up comedian means, you know? In fact, I saw on the stage of the Tivoli Tommy Trinder, who I thought was convulsively funny, though I didn't understand a lot of the things he said.
Now, come off your eye, old spazzer. I'm no apparition what's come to haunt you.
All I knew was that my mother glared at my father, and my father made sort of snorting noises, which he tended to make when he was trying not to laugh or earn my mother's profound disapproval. I think I know what all you women are staring at. You're all looking at my penis, aren't you? And there he is, ladies and gentlemen.
Barry wanted me to take part in an Australiana night. Dear old Soles got a bit carried away, and how do I say, his world-famous appendage, which more or less has a life of its own as well, for the first time made a public appearance. I never saw it. 2,000 or 3,000 people at the Royal Festival Hall in London saw this beast that apparently came out. I was just shrieking and running away from him to the other side of the stage going, no, put it away. Get out of here. And so afterwards, I said to Barry, you're very, very naughty. You deserve a big smack.
That Kylie Minogue should be chased off the stage of the Royal Festival Hall by a sort of phallus-brandishing Australian diplomat seemed, in a way, a first. And for me, anyway, it was a sort of little taste of the old outrageous days.
In the 60s, the bawdiness and obscenities were within the conventions of the 60s. Now, sexuality and the way it's spoken of and the humour surrounding it has moved into a much broader spectrum, and so Barry's humour now is much more obtuse and strange. And he stayed ahead of the game.
This is consideration for you. You know what I say to a girl who I might have just met? I say, see, I got these in my pocket. I say, could you use one of these? I say, huh? Could you use one of these? That's what I say. Yes, sir? I say, could you really? Now, yeah. Now, what she says... Now, if she says, oh, no, thank you, you've eliminated a major stumbling block. You have. You have, Vicar. Because then, you can spend money on the dinner then, and you know you've got a fighting chance later on. You've eliminated the non-starters, Claire. I found that the dirtier Les is, the better, because it is a kind of overkill. He is, in a sense, transcendentally filthy. He is sublimely. He's the apotheosis of the blue comedian. And somehow it's forgivable. If Les were any cleaner, I think he'd give profound offence to people.
So Les is just wonderful because he is so oblivious to how hideous he is. Would you like a Kleenex?
Oh, don't you worry, Joan, please, you know. My saliva is safe, Joan. I'll tell you what, they'll be bottling my saliva in a year or two, they will. There'll be a phlegm bank, there will. You know, but I don't want to raise a distasteful subject, but I mean, I'm not going to mention it by name, but there's some pretty nasty things going around, but you can only catch that one, they tell me, if you drink the equivalent of 3 cups of saliva. And I reckon after the second cup you'd smell a rat, wouldn't it?
It's got a lot to do with Barry's experience with alcohol, because that's an anti-alcohol sketch, amongst other things. The vileness of Les is pretty much down to the number of amber nectars he's poured down his neck. And Barry is very sincere about that. I mean, booze nearly wrecked his life, and to this day, if anybody rings Barry on the sort of Alcoholics Anonymous circuit, Barry will do it. He'll go and help.
I've cleaned up my act. I have become a fitness freak. I think I'll say that again. A fitness freak.
I think probably what cured him was not just a conviction to stop drinking, but he developed the characters and his range of performance to the extent where he could cope, where he had all these instruments for coping. He's an extremely sensitive man, and he comes from a culture which did not value sensitivity. In fact, it rather outlawed you in those days. And he had to do it all by himself. And that can be good for you in some ways, makes you very strong. But it can also, it's a capital formula for neurosis. And neurosis is what he was dealing with. But what the hell? He dealt with it in an extremely funny way.
I am completely off the grog. I am. I'm a teetotaler. I don't drink at all, except for the occasional glass of Chardonnay. Now, I can hear a few know-alls out here, and there's always a know-all. Know-all, know nothing, as my mother used to say. I can hear a few know-alls saying, come off it, Les, isn't Chardonnay an alcoholic drink? And to you I say, with the greatest respect, pig's ass.
It's been said that some 30 years ago I fought a successful battle against alcohol. I prefer to regard myself as someone who's been happily defeated by alcohol. In other words, I've completely surrendered to the fact that I can't drink alcohol successfully, which is a life-saving discovery. But it was a long time ago. I think people are interested in alcoholism in performers because it's part of the romantic idea of the suffering clown, isn't it? It's part of the troubled entertainer.
You know, there is an argument that addicts have addictive personalities, that if you're addicted to one substance, you will be addicted to something else. Well, as we know, Barry, I don't think smokes, he doesn't drink. He may lash into caffeine from time to time, I don't know about that. But I suspect he, these days, is addicted to his audiences and to the laughter and the roars and the cheers that he gets from them.
Chardonnay, Chardonnay, it's the upmarket drink of today. Although it's not fizzy, it's a beauty aphrodisiac act when you're in need of a lay. It used to be double tequilas that could prize off the pants of the Sheilas. But now they won't have it away, no way, for less than a large Chardonnay.
He's not a type I like. He's common. Very C-O-M-M-O-N. But Barry Humphries likes him, and the Australian government insists that he appears in my shows in order to promote Australia or do something of the kind. Personally, I think he does us a disfavour.
It's the tipple that's come here to stay. It lubricates women from Southend to Plinlimmon, from Wick down to Old Colwyn Bay. No manly manoeuvre seems sinful to a lovely young girl with a skinful. They'll never scream, put that away. Thanks to you, Chardonnay. Chardonnay. Thank you.
I wonder if any of you have been to a slide evening before. You haven't?
The prototype Edna sometimes appeared on television. Didn't look quite the character we know now. She was much more, diffident. She would hesitate. Edna would never do that now.
Oh, that is Piccadilly Circus. There's me. There we go, little statue of ethos. You know, I'm going to explode a myth. How often do we hear about the English Reserve? It just does not exist, and you can take it from me as a seasoned traveller. You know, I was standing there in Piccadilly Circus minding my own business, and you'd be surprised at the number of chappies who came up and spoke to me, just out of the blue, you know.
I tried doing Edna a few times in London in the 60s, but if you couldn't impersonate Harold Macmillan in the first half of the 1960s, you might as well have retired from the satire movement. Besides, I've never really thought of myself as a satirist. Of course, to some extent I was. Edna was invented as a satire in A Melbourne Housewife, and a specific one. Then I did a Russell Harty interview.
I find mayonnaise very good for the hair, and I wonder if any ladies who are spending a small fortune on hair tonics and things know that ordinary mayonnaise is excellent for your hair. If you rub it well into the scalp at bedtime, because you wake up like a tossed salad, but it doesn't... With any luck, anyway, ladies.
When you were first on my show, nobody knew who you were. I wonder if you'd like to take this opportunity of thanking me for the kind of help that
It's no show without punch, is it, Russell Harty? Heard you complaining in the paper the other day that London Weekend hadn't given you a farewell present. You're into gratitude in a big way, aren't you, darling?
Once that character is assembled, you don't refer to the character, once he's in character, as anything but Edna. And so Edna becomes the reality. And what's so fascinating is that you want to play with Edna. In other words, you don't transgress that rule, because Edna takes over, and it's a call to play. You play with Edna, or Barry as Edna, and you feed Edna ideas.
I wondered if you were frightened of being molested in the streets nowadays in London.
Well, people look at me in a funny way, a sort of hungry way, I think. Well, I do. I mean, I can't help... Wouldn't I be a silly woman to deny that I'm a very attractive woman? I mean, people find me tremendously attractive.
But what kind of things do you have to do to sort of repel borders, so to speak?
I think it's just my dignity. I think up to a point, you know, people realise they can go there, that far and no further.
Really?
I'd like you to bear that in mind, if you would.
If you're talking dressed up as a woman to someone like Gloria Swanson, he has made you take part in his game. You have signed on. You can't really break the rules. So you're on the back foot anyway. So anyone confronted with Edna is in a first-class condition to be teased.
Have you ever been to our wide brown continent?
No, but I have been invited, and I now certainly must go.
Oh, we'd love you there, darling. There are a lot of women just like me over there.
Relatives there?
Lots of relations. I'll give you some little introductions after the show. May I?
I'm going to Australia, dear Edna.
Who?
Edna really does inhabit the real world. Her world, you know. And I never really think of these characters unless I happen to be doing them. But I know the characters so well that I can actually inhabit them. On the one or two occasions on which I met Graham Greene, he described Edna, he was a fan of Edna's, and he called her the woman you inhabit.
In this country where we're used to the panto dame kind of role, where it is transparently male, where it's Les Dawson without his teeth in, where it's all, you know it's a man there, and you can relax, and there's no sexual ambivalence or anything like that. There is no sexual ambivalence with Barry. He becomes a woman. He becomes Edna.
I'd like to think that people don't really think that there's an actor involved. To the extent where I don't feel involved, oddly.
I believe in the big G. I'm a very grateful woman. I wouldn't badmouth Barry Humphries in a funny way. I feel that that's where you're trying to lead me. I do feel I'm trying to be... An attempt is being made to coerce me into speaking disparagingly of someone I don't feel that passionate about. He has played a role in my career, a role which I have freely acknowledged in my autobiography and in this little, well, rather intimate interview where some exclusives are being delivered to our viewers. There's no question of that. I never had postnatal depression. Funny enough, my children have. It's hard to have a megastar mother. I don't think it's easy. I mean, I sacrificed wonderful career opportunities to look after them. Well, look after them, to employ people to look after them. Kenny always comes back, doesn't he, Madge? He gives me a big hug and a kiss and he says, "You're my girlfriend, Mummy."
I think you know my mother.
Oh, that's a dirty lie, pal.
No, it isn't.
Kenny, darling! Liz Patterson, what are you doing in my son's outlet? You're a disgrace to Australia, Leslie.
Come off it, Edna.
Oh, Mum, he was just shopping for his wife.
Kenny, when are you going to tie the knot, darling? You know how I long to be a grandmother.
The public knows the story of Dame Edna. Her beginnings in Mooney Ponds, her children, her gradual rise. His comedy is really a fiction of this character's origins and life and progress.
I had heartache when I lost Lois. You see, I had a tragedy in my life. I've mentioned it in my autobiography, but it was an awful thing. I had a child called Lois. Lovely, lovely child. And avid at the breast. And I went back to the country where I'd come from for a weekend. I took little Lois in a little cot, little carry cot, and I left her on the veranda. And in the middle of the night, I normally would wake up and feed her a couple of times. But I was having a little bit of trouble. And in the morning I woke, I overslept. And I woke up and I ran out on the veranda and she was gone. This child was completely gone. And they found koala bear paw tracks on the veranda and through the garden, and we never saw her again.
When there's somebody that you love, as everyone loves Dame Edna, we all know her trials and her tribulations, and we've suffered through her husband's prostate.
My husband, I've lost him. Well, I lost him, fortunately, over a very long period of time. But sometimes I wonder if he's still clinically dead. Because his prostate is in Tokyo. It's, I've endowed a clinic there, and it's still, actually, they've kept it. It's in a glass case, still working. They keep it going electronically.
I feel Edna's pain.
But Edna is up for grabs, as she announces, and she's seen with people. She's been approached, as she would tell you. Well, Henry Kissinger, Bill Gates, you name them. They've all approached me. But fundamentally, I'm enjoying my freedom. I've never been interested in the physical side of marriage, particularly when I was married. I think Edna's always had what Max Beerbohm called a low sexual temperature. But I'm a contented woman and I don't need a partner. I have my bridesmaid Madge. And she assists me as best she can. She actually is a hindrance more than a help. But I've helped her. I mean, I would get the Nobel Prize. I'd be Baroness Everidge if they knew what I've done for that minx. My bridesmaid and to share each other's load. Down life's weary road, my bridesmaid and Madge, darling, have you got your script? Have you got your script? Don't snap at me, Madge. When I had the shingles, she had them as well. When I run a temperature, she's hot. I thought, who can play Madge now that Madeline is dead? So we auditioned. And I saw an endless stream of camp ladies, all very nice, all rolling their eyes and being, well, camp and funny. And none of them were any good except for Emily Perry. You mean my bridesmaid was a pioneer of New Zealand feminism? She was. That's why it never took off. You know, she didn't burn her brow, the neighbours did.
He said, "Will you try and look pensive?" So I thought, well, I don't know exactly what he wants. Anyway, I took some photos. And then he said, "Oh, will you come and stand beside me, please?" Oh, he said, "You're a little one, aren't you?" So I thought, oh, perhaps he wants somebody small. So I jumped out of my shoes. I said, well, I'm shorter still without my shoes on. Anyway, that was that. And in the evening, my agent rang me up. And she said, "You've got the job." Oh, I said, "What do I do?" She said, "I haven't a clue." And I still don't know.
What I instantly recognised was that she was intelligent and that she had the God-given ability to do nothing. To do nothing. Madge comes from New Zealand. Madge is a celebrity in New Zealand, which gives you a rough idea what the rest of the people over there are.
She's terribly rude to the people. Yeah. They love it, they love it, they love it. You know, the lady sitting there in the red dress.
You look a bit like a letterbox in there. The people put their post in your mouth the other day. You realise that a lot of these people have never been the object of curiosity.
in their lives. I'm more interested in them than their mothers were. Certainly considerably more interested in them than the husband. It's a kind of benediction she bestows upon the audience. A benediction perhaps of embarrassment, it might be said. But I think she knows where to draw the line. She goes as near as possible, you see, to a point where a member of the audience may be hurt. And then that's it.
Where are you from, Nettie?
Buckinghamshire.
Buckinghamshire, how lovely. Oh, how beautiful home there.
Very nice,
I'm
yes.
sure you have. And look, you make your own clothes too.
A woman once said to me, "Why are you picking on me, Edna?" She was laughing and, of course, proud that I had. And I said, "Don't use that word. I'm not picking on you. I'm choosing you." And I said, "Can you imagine the old disciples catching their fish in the Sea of Galilee? That adorable old, our Lord, wandering around and saying, you know, whatever he said, the lovely story in the Bible about I'll make you fishers of men and things like that. Do you imagine them saying, 'Stop picking on me, Jesus'? Would they say that? No. They're being raised up. They're being elevated, sanctified, blessed. Something special, something magical, something epiphanous. Scrabble players will know what I mean by that.
I'm sorry, I can't pick you, really, because... See this little blouse of yours? It would strobe on television. It would... Strobe is an old Scandinavian word meaning ghastly.
I like to think it's therapeutic for people, that they leave the theatre better people in some way, nicer, cleansed. Some catharsis has taken place.
Look at the back of the bed. Please, studio audience, don't try and read something yucky into... What's the cause of those abrasions on the wall?
It's the children jumping on the bed.
It's always seemingly improvised.
You're quick-witted, you are.
Because he refines the act according to where the pitch of the audience takes him, and once he grabs that, he's off and running.
There's a woman looking at me down here. Oh, yes, this little woman on the end. Her eyes are boring into me, and I know what you're looking at. You're looking at this bracelet of mine, aren't you? What's your name?
Jan.
Hello, Jan. Isn't it a beautiful bracelet? It's priceless, but I don't need it. I'm here to give it to you.
Yes.
Take it.
Oh, thank
There you are. It's yours, beloved. May it bring you such happiness, such luck. It will. Your family will be so jealous of that. Your sister-in-law will be green with envy, won't she? You will. You'll have words with her, perhaps a falling out. And then your husband will take her part. There'll be bitterness, won't there? A horrible coldness will settle over your marriage. You'll be sleeping in separate rooms. You'll start drinking and taking prescribed medication. One night you'll jump into the car, you'll go off weeping and bawling into the night. You'll go through a red light, you'll be involved in an accident, you'll turn into a basket case. Give it back to me, give it back.
She's always announcing to the audience how far the distance is between herself and them. Like that she used to sing a song called My Public.
You need to have a pretty humble attitude when you see little faces looking up, grotesque with gratitude. But from tiny tots to grannies, I love all your nooks and crannies. That's what my public means to me.
What she's doing is demonstrating the sort of the aggression of the celebrity and the hypocrisy of their supposed decency and niceness.
David Putney's on the wall, the royal visitors who call. That's what the public stand for me. All those requests I get to stay with famous folk in Saint-Tropez. That's their idea of fun for me. But you can keep Roman Polanski and Bianca. It's for the company of nobodies like you I hanker. You're my shelter from the storm. You're as precious as my love. My public nice of the bad. There's me. I'm standing on the Bridge of Sighs. It's a misnomer because it's actually quite small, no size at all.
That was a wonderful piss take of who the English think they are and who the Australians think the English think they are and who Australians think they are and so on.
Now, that's me again on the Bridge of Sighs at Stratford, talking to a Shakespearean kiddie. I've got a wonderful... He's too young to remember Shakespeare, of course. I have a wonderful way with children. Look at the little mite. He's Oh. That is a corner of Stratford-on-Avon. Notice the half-timbered... Look, a half-timbered car!
And that's the kind of stuff I guess I would have liked Barry to go on doing, but Dame Edna was on the money, and she just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then she went into this completely Dada figure, really, you know, this amazingly dressed person with this wildly improbable life career. Except, you know, it's not so wildly improbable after all. Dame Edna does have a seat in the House of Lords. You can go to the House of Lords, you can see her, she's sitting there. She's not called Edna Everidge, but she's there. She's called Baroness... whatever.
I think that Thatcher derived strangely from Edna. There was a point in her career when Ednification took place. Suddenly the hair changed, the clothing changed, the manner. She didn't model herself on me. She was a creation all on her own. She's a one-off, Maggie. But she was very, very influenced me at one point and by me, and the reason for that is very simply she rang me up in the middle of the night and said, help. I think I'm the only person who's ever heard a creed occur from Margaret Thatcher.
I get a lot of calls from the current Prime Minister at all hours of the day and night asking for advice. Does she still ring you by any chance?
She hasn't rung me for 13 years.
The other night she woke me at 3 in the morning, driving me mad. Where is Hong Kong? She said. She said, Edna, she was crying. She said, how do I pronounce Ich bin ein Berliner?
I said, come round, and we had a bit of a cuddle. And she said, well, what am I going to do? I need an image. She said, I'm aware that I'm a bit of a Lincolnshire frump. I want to look something. She said, I want your look. Some years ago, I'd been watching talk shows on television and thinking they never got the secret of people. They never got the juice of their guests. And I thought, really, it was because the interviewers weren't very interesting in themselves. They verged on non-entities. So I approached London Weekend and I said, I'd like to do a talk show. And they said, they're done to death. I said, mine will be different.
Because it's in the form of a talk show. It's really a monologue interrupted by a total stranger.
They made an experience deconstructing the talk show. It tore it apart and then put it back together again as a vehicle for out-and-out comedy and entertainment.
I want you to say a word, one of the vilest, foulest words you could possibly think of. Just say it.
Blow dry.
I hate that word.
They were there only to serve one purpose, really, when you look at those shows, and that was for Barry to mock them. We will all treasure the moment when he said to Geoffrey Archer...
I think if you can't laugh at yourself, you could be missing the joke of the century, couldn't you?
If you're anything but a fool, you're terrified. Makes Jeremy Paxman look like a sort of sheep, you know. No, this is the real thing. And I'll tell you why. Because Barry Humphries is as bright as Jeremy Paxman. I remember one particular incident that when I knew I had a good line to deliver, and I could see him coming back, and it's a real pro, because I put my hand down there, and I went like that, and he could see it out of the corner of his eye, which meant I've got a sentence, just shut up. So he shut up on the spot.
About 2 or 3 months ago, I went through a trial, and my home in the country...
I must have missed that.
I wish I had.
That was a pro. He could have just charged on and ruined my line and just taken the centre himself. But he saw the hand, immediately reacted, allowed the line, and then came back.
Mud sticks, doesn't it, Jeff?
Almost as if they want to be torn apart. It's almost as if they have a desire that this awful woman is going to kill them.
I'd like you to welcome the distinguished Charlton Heston.
It's ridiculous. I'm very embarrassed. I was playing tennis and I slipped. It's just a bad sprain.
We've got a trained nurse here, Chuck. Up you go, and please help Mr. Heston, will you, sister? She'll help you. Now, gently, gently. Take it very gently. The stairs are very.
It's more like a kind of competitive sport. The sense of danger is part of the thrill, the nervousness, the excitement. And that's what you want, the sense of not knowing what's going to happen.
I came on with my Stetson hat, and I had it filled with this money that I print. This is the Larry Hagman's $10,000. I think at that time they were $1,000, but because of inflation and so forth. And so I had a whole bunch of these in my hat. When I took my hat off, it just rained money, you know, just all over the place. You know. It was a lot of fun. And Dame Edna took umbrage.
He was being ostentatious with his money, Arthur. He was. We're all as rich as creases on this show.
He had a long talk with me afterwards and chastised me and made me settle down and be a nice interview.
Well, do you have a lot of people in the jacuzzi at once?
Just family.
Oh. How big is it?
30.
30 people?
Yeah.
In the one jacuzzi?
Yes.
Do you have business associates?
Oh, I always do business in the jacuzzi. I always talk to them. When I used to have agents, I used to have them in there. We'd talk and blah, blah, blah. But I don't have those anymore, so I got rid of all the people who
So
had
you
those.
don't do your business in your jacuzzi?
Barry never asked the obvious questions, that's for sure.
Aren't I good, by the way, not having referred to Dallas all this time?
Oh, I wish we could have had a part for Dame Edna on Dallas somehow. She could have played my mother.
How about that?
She would have been good in Neighbours. She would have stolen the whole show. We wouldn't have got a word in, I'm sure. But, yeah, she could have fitted into Ramsay Street.
I was into something very special then, something called napomancy. I said I could read the future from a kiddie's nappy. By just releasing a safety pin, your future was unfurled before them. And you know what I saw, Jason?
What did she see?
I saw your chart success. I did.
Just there.
I saw a lot of number ones, and I saw...
Barry's well aware of the absurdity of show business and celebrity. He was one of the first people to analyse it. But he wants it, and if you want it, you better have it, or God help you and everybody around you. And the great advantage of Edna to Barry is he can get up there on stage and say everything he wants to be.
If you were one of the Spice Girls, do you think any of them reflect your personality?
I would be spooky Spice. In my own day, darlings, and I adore you and always will, I was a little bit of a Spice Girl in Australia. I was. I started girl power, and I'm really then I became housewife power, and now I'm mega power.
He is a comic genius. I mean, there is no way that any of these characters could pass for real in the outside world. They inhabit a world of the imagination. They inhabit a world of the great, strange characters, you know, the Mad Hatter, figures like that. They are part of the extravagance of comedy.
I wanted to get together with you and talk about a few cultural matters for a long time. I wonder, you wouldn't mind if I just,
Not at all, no.
Hop in. Just a little. Would you care for a drop yourself?
I don't think so, thanks. Or it's
you
a bit
never-
early for me.
Well, it is early, I must admit, but we have a different time scale in Australia and they're open, my lord.
There's no question that Barry Humphries could have had a brilliantly successful academic career. He's a real scholar in all the fields he studies. I mean, John Betjeman was astonished when he reached Australia for the first time and encountered Barry and realised that Barry not only knew more about all of the Australian turn-of-the-century artists, musicians, and so on than he did, but also all the European ones. Barry was very, very learned, very, very young, and has continued throughout his career. He's never stopped educating himself. There's scarcely anyone he can talk to on the level of his own knowledge.
Honda had his studio for a while, just over there. And another visitor was Aubrey Beardsley, already a dying man, but one of the greatest of all draftsmen. His works are still popular in reproduction, hanging perhaps in tatters from the ruins of Haight-Ashbury, or decorating the boudoirs of aging teeny boppers. It was amongst these chalk cliffs that Beardsley conceived his one prose erotic work, his novel, Under the Hill. I'm looking around at a lot of these books that you've got here. It's incredible. Have you read all of these volumes?
No, I have a lot of them for their beauty.
A bit relieved to hear that, because I think you and me in public life, we don't get too much time to dip into the odd volume.
I'm not sure that I particularly want to talk ad nauseum about my manager. I don't mind answering the odd question about him. But to me, I mean, we do lead quite separate lives.
I'd love to see him now put Edna through some kind of crisis or breakdown and take the celebrity idea to its proper conclusion, because I think there's something in him that would dramatically handle that very well.
You see, in a sense, I don't control these characters anymore. If people say to me, well, where's Edna going next? You know, you've done everything with her. She's been a housewife. Then she was a superstar. Now she's a megastar. Now she's renounced her title in order to support the Australian Republican movement, which, of course, indeed was something I persuaded her to do in order to satirise the Republican movement and to irritate as much as possible the rather pompous stuffed shirts who espouse this doomed enterprise. I'm pretty apolitical, but there's a big pressure on in Australia to make me the President of the Australian Republic in the millennium, and I would accept. I would love to be the President, and I suppose it's because I want to be on the money. And I want to be on the stamps. It's a secret ambition of mine to just be on the money and on the stamps. It's not much to ask, is it? It's not likely to happen in England. A certain person, a friend of mine, who shall be nameless, monopolises that department rather, doesn't she? Where is Edna going to go? I don't know the answer, of course, because it will happen very unexpectedly on stage. She will tell us. You see, as we speak, Edna's doing something on Broadway, right on Broadway, and she's probably by now discovered that she's very closely related to Madeleine Albright. And I have now my own website, all started up by a lovely boy in Florida.
Can someone open this beautiful laptop for me? I never know which little knob to touch.
He delved into my family tree, something I didn't dare to do, though I notice Hillary Clinton is shaking her family tree pretty vigorously in the hope that a Red Sea pedestrian is going to fall out, or several, because she's, of course, kowtowing to the New Yorkers a little bit. And little does she know that I'm Jewish. I am quite, well, pretty certainly I'm Jewish, and I'm also a bit Dutch and Irish, which means really that I have exactly the same genetic constituents as a member of a Broadway audience. Isn't that funny? But I don't know. It will be she who tells us, because by now I can kind of wind these characters up and set them in motion and observe them in a rather detached way. But I think it's in the interest of Australia. If they're going to have a president, it should be me and not some of these pathetic people who are struggling to put themselves on the map, push themselves forward. It would be sad, and I think the majority of Australians, according to a recent survey, want me.
On the day gone when I left Australia for England across the sea, and though I'm now a household name, I will never be the same. Australia's cast its spell on me.
He's a true showman. He's been supremely important for Australia. And I think as far as Australians are concerned, because we don't even imagine Barry or Edna or Les not being there, we probably don't realise how much of an impact they have had.
Barry's been very important for Australia in showing the world that it can produce a lot of creative and brilliant people, both in the arts, in political commentary, and a whole range of areas.
It's the land of milk and honey. It's so rich and safe and funny. Australia is the land for me.
I think the envy has died away as people realise that whatever Barry was doing, he wasn't lessening Australia's image abroad any more than our tennis players were or our swimmers. Of course not. He was a champion. And Australians do like a champion. It's not true that they hate all tall poppies. They just don't like tall poppies if tall poppies stop behaving like tall poppies. But Australia likes its champions, and Barry's a champion. And the characters he's invented are champions. And I think if Australia does become a republic, there's a very, very good chance Edna will get the job. But her chief rival, of course, is Les. Of course, he has the political experience.
I'm a hard act to follow. They say I should be in that Guinness book. I'm a hard act to follow. At my last checkup, 20 nurses had a look. Jealous blokes have tried to do my reputation harm. They reckon it's technique that gives love-making all its charm. But who needs technique when you've got one like a baby's arm? I'm a hard with an apple in its fist. I'm a hard act to follow. I'm the answer to a lot of maidens' prayers. Such a hard act to follow. They never feel the same way after Les. Some ladies throw a fit when my equipment comes on view, but I always bung some chewing gum on the far tip of my cue. I say hop aboard and I'll stop pushing when you start to chew. To follow.
The performance is the most passionate experience. The relationship with the audience, which is marvellously anonymous too, isn't it? It could be, you see, that we performers don't like getting too close to individuals. We're not we're not terribly skilled or confident at what the Americans call interpersonal relations. Much better with the footlights or the cameras or something between us and them. And quite truthfully, sometimes, after an extremely busy, stressful day, I will go to the theatre, disguise myself appropriately as someone very unlike myself, step from the darkness into the light, and say to myself, alone at last. I would like, above all, to be known as a nice person, as an approachable person, as a human being. And perhaps one day, if I can notch up enough cures, a saint. Is that too much to ask? I think not.
No worries.
Polly's take a handbag bashing in one of Aunt Edna Everidge's first ever outings. Crack open a tinny for our film comedy The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie. Four's Night Down Under continues next.
Scandal.